Hello everybody, and welcome to the Thursday edition of Video Clips. This will be a much shorter talk than my Tuesday talk. I had many things to cover. I keep saying that I am going to stop writing articles about vitamin D. I've created a huge library of articles refuting this idea of vitamin D deficiency, and my gosh, I can't resist. It's a vitamin. It's not a vitamin, it's a hormone, people. I keep saying I'm not going to do it, but then there are so many new provocative studies every week that come out that are published in medical journals showing that I'm right about it and bringing up new concerns about vitamin D. And so I'm going to share a couple of them with you today. So one of the most common misperceptions, I think, that drives people to take vitamin D as a supplement is that vitamin D builds strong bones, which is true. But this idea that everybody has that if a little bit of something is good for you, multiples of that are much better. Like there's just no such thing as too much of a good thing, right? Research really continues to show, though, that vitamin D has almost no effect on bone health when it's taken in supplement form. So a Cochrane review showed no effect for vitamin D supplementation on bone mineral content, hip bone mineral density, or forearm bone mineral density. Some studies have shown that vitamin D worsens bone health, such as the study that reported that 200 international units of vitamin D daily for 12 months resulted in decreased leg strength and no change in bone mineral density. Yet another research group concluded, quote, continuing widespread use of vitamin D for osteoporosis prevention in community-dwelling adults without specific risk factors for vitamin D deficiency seems to be inappropriate. A new study confirms the fact that supplemental vitamin D is actually counterproductive for building strong bones. And this one I just had to share. 331 adults in Canada were randomized to take either 400, 4,000, or 10,000 international units of vitamin D per day for 3 years. Average vitamin D at the baseline when this all started was 31.5 nanograms per deciliter, which is considered normal by some doctors and insufficient by others. It just depends on who you're talking to and what lab is being used, because the standards, if you even can call them that, are all over the place. The subjects were also given calcium if needed to ensure that calcium intake averaged about 1,200 milligrams per day. Outcomes to be measured were bone mineral density at the radius and tibia, which was assessed using high-resolution peripheral quantitative computed tomography. Serum vitamin D levels increased for those taking both 4,000 and 10,000 international units per day and averaged 53 and 58 nanograms per deciliter respectively. Change in bone mineral density at the radius, and this is where it gets interesting, minus 1.2% for 400 international units, minus 2.4% for 4,000, and minus 3.5% with 10,000 international units per day. Mean change in the tibia, minus 0.4%, minus 1%, and minus 1.7% respectively. In other words, the more vitamin D the subjects took in supplemental form, the worse their bone mineral density became. Changes in bone strength were not statistically significant. Higher dose vitamin D supplementation, in this case, did increase plasma levels, but it had a negative effect on bone mineral density and no effect on bone strength. Lab tests get better, while health, the thing that should matter, got worse. And this is a very common problem in healthcare. We're working for pretty blood work, we want nice blood pressure results, but the methods of getting there are not all the same. This study strengthens the findings of an analysis that included 33 randomized trials with over 50,000 participants, showing that calcium and vitamin D supplements, either alone or in combination, do not reduce the risk of fractures. The pills were deemed useless regardless of dose, patient gender, history of fractures, or the amount of daily calcium consumed. The advice to avoid sun exposure, use sunscreen whenever outdoors, and take vitamin D supplements is ill-advised and harmful. Get out in the sun without sunscreen and your body will produce vitamin D. And I keep reminding everybody, it is a hormone, not a vitamin. And this is why when you walk into the grocery store, you don't see foods naturally that contain vitamin D. In fact, and you don't see foods that naturally contain other hormones either. I mean, if you walked into the grocery store and said, point me in the direction of the foods that contain insulin, people would go, what? You know, we don't have any foods fortified with insulin, and we don't have any foods that naturally contain it. It's a hormone that your body produces. All right, so the second vitamin D issue I want to bring up is the unreliable testing method. So I've been talking about this for a long time. Measuring plasma vitamin D levels is not reliable for determining vitamin D status. Again, hormone, not a vitamin. Studies show that the error rate is between 60 and 80% in favor of overestimating the deficiency, quote unquote, because it doesn't really exist, of vitamin D. Another issue is that lab tests don't measure something called vitamin D binding protein, which can vary significantly and affects the amount of biologically active vitamin D. A recent case report shows another issue with vitamin D testing, which is that the time of day that the sample is drawn makes a difference. Now, in this particular situation, the woman the case was a woman in her 40s who had been taking 5,000 international units of vitamin D at midday consistently for over a year before she was followed for a period of time. Her recent history showed plasma levels of vitamin D at about 60, which would be deemed sufficient by almost any doctor, even the disease-mongering ones that love the vitamin D myth. She took no other supplements. She lived in Northern California, usually had some sun exposure in the morning, and she did not consume vitamin D and fortified foods. Her plasma levels were tested 3 times a day, and her levels at midday were 20% lower than levels in the morning and 13% lower than levels at night. Plasma levels were not affected by taking the dose 1 hour before or after the measurement. Vitamin D levels, interestingly enough, fell by 25% on the day before she contracted a cold. This reduction took place in spite of the fact that she continued to take vitamin D supplements daily, and the levels returned to baseline 2 weeks later without any change in her daily dose. Now, you might be thinking this is just a case report, but it supports the findings of previous studies that have shown that lower levels of vitamin D are a consequence, not a cause of inflammation and illness. It confirms the results of other studies that have found that the time of day does matter when measuring vitamin D status. And it shows that supplementation has little to do with plasma vitamin D levels. Taking the supplement during the cold, for example, made no difference at all because inflammation levels were suppressing plasma levels. The inaccuracy of testing is one of many inconvenient facts that the epidemic of vitamin D deficiency is a made-up story with no scientific grounding. The issues with testing are far more devastating to the story, however, because this means that studies in which conclusions were based on measurement of plasma vitamin D levels were unreliable, and this is almost all of them. So, I would like to think that this would be the end of the nonsense, but I have no confidence that this will be the case. The vitamin D deficiency story, even though false, has been repeated so many times that people believe it has become truth through repetition, not because it's been subjected to the right type of scrutiny. Well, that's it. Maybe I'll never do another vitamin D video again, but I can't help myself when I see these kinds of things. I think I need to report them to you because we still have a lot of people promoting this myth of vitamin D deficiency, and we have people taking these pills for no reason. And I didn't cover side effects of vitamin D supplementation in these particular articles, but I've written plenty about that also. All right, as usual, if you're not a subscriber, subscribe. Pass this on to anybody who you think would enjoy watching it. I'll be back to you next week with more news.